Welcome to our program update and ESB Q&A session. It's now 2 p.m., so let's get started. My name is Portia Baldad, and I'm the marketing manager for the Summerhill and Enerva team. Thanks for joining us. Before we get started, let's go over a few housekeeping items. There are quite a few people attending today's webinar. As such, all microphones have been muted to avoid interruption. Throughout the presentation, you can submit questions to our team through the questions feature on the control panel. If you have any technical issues that you can't resolve or need to leave early, we'll be posting a recording of this webinar on the ESB program website and on the program resources page. It'll include both the presentation and the Q&A session. We're going to kick off today's presentation with an update on the ESB program and the results to date. We'll then spend the majority of our time answering your questions. We'll start by addressing questions that were sent in during the webinar registration, and then answer those that have been sent in during today's presentation. To recap, you can use the questions feature on the control panel to send in your questions. The ESB support team will then end our webinar with tips on how to ensure a smooth application process. We're joined today by Allison Mostowich and Mark Hewitt from Emissions Reduction Alberta. Allison, our Manager of Outreach and Engagement, will provide an update on the program and discuss the results to date. Mark, our Program Director, will be available during the Q&A session to answer your questions. We'll also be joined by Myron Sakantha from the Innerva and Summerhill team. Myron will present a few helpful tips to keep in mind as you move through the program. So let's get right into it. Here's Allison to kick off today's presentation.
Thanks, Portia, and thanks everybody for joining us. We're happy to see a great interest in the Energy Savings for Business program. At this time, we've reserved almost 50% of the available incentive funding for project applications. This includes the 30% of the total incentive budget dedicated to solar PV, which reached full program subscription late in March. We've also received a flurry of post-project applications. To date, we have approved 35 completed projects worth $365,000 in incentives. We also received a large volume of applications during the first 3 months of the program. This led to some delays in application turnaround, but we have since addressed the turnaround times, and thank you for your patience while we were doing so. Participants and contractors can now accept applications to be turned around in 5 business days. This means reviewing and approving applications or reviewing and issuing information requests. As such, having a fully completed application will speed up turnaround times. We encourage everyone to continue submitting applications to the ESB program. We have almost 300 measures available for incentives, including waste energy recovery based on the organic Rankine cycle, and increased incentives for smaller CHP sizes. Please continue to check the website for program updates and new additions to the eligible measures list. You can submit multiple applications for your sites as long as you're under project and parent company limits. One of our major priorities for this program was to reach a diverse range of project types. We're happy to report that we're off to a great start. Applications so far span every measure we have available. Some of our most popular technologies so far are solar PV, various lighting systems, including LED bay fixtures and exterior LEDs, variable frequency drives, boilers and heaters, CHP, and insulation. Those following our program will know that solar PV was a very popular measure with lots of demand from both participants and contractors. Within 2 months of the program launch, solar PV reached full subscription. We received 300 projects that will result in 30 megawatts of total capacity and support around $55 million in total project value. For a short-term stimulus program, we are very pleased with these results. We are excited to support jobs as companies like yours carry out these projects over the coming years. Participation is also coming from all over Alberta. We're seeing a mix of projects in both rural and urban regions. This slide highlights a quick sample of ESB projects from across the province. For example, an industrial facility in Guy, Alberta is looking to implement 4 different measure categories: building envelope, HVAC, lighting systems, and lighting control technologies. There's also a small office building in St. Paul that will use the ESB program to install a high efficiency furnace and RTU with an economizer. On the other end of the spectrum, Lafarge and Edmonton will be upgrading their LED lighting system, and Canadian Tire in Calgary will be implementing 2 variable frequency drives. Down in southern Alberta, an agricultural facility in Grassy Lake is looking to install 3 solar PV systems greater than 15 kilowatts. We're also excited to see some innovative projects in the works. For example, we're looking forward to seeing progress on how a CHP project will work with a geothermal project. As the program progresses, we are continuing to look for ways to make the program accessible to more businesses and easier to navigate. For example, participants can now grant their contractors additional access to their applications. The application system was originally designed to give participants full access to applications while restricting contractors to specific details. This system change will give contractors more flexibility while ensuring participants maintain proper control over their applications. As we previously mentioned, we've also greatly reduced review times. You can expect to have your application reviewed within 3 to 5 business days. Lastly, we're excited to announce the launch of our application support service. This service is meant to help participants and contractors with 3 or more measures or additional project complexity apply to the program. The program team will work with you to build the application, help streamline your journey, answer your questions, and as a result, speed up the review process. We're also exploring new measures to add to the program, and we're always open to new suggestions. If you have any ideas, please send them to our contact center team. We would love to hear them. I'm now going to hand it back to Portia, who will be moderating our Q&A session.
Thanks, Allison. So as mentioned, we asked for questions before the webinar, and we'll be looking for questions throughout this presentation. We'll start by addressing some of those questions that we received during that webinar registration process. So Allison, Mark, and Myron will also be here to help answer those questions. Our first question is for Allison. This attendee has asked, we have spoken to many clients about the ESB program. They're looking for reassurance that they'll receive the incentives, especially with large capacity projects. What can we say to address this?
Thanks, Portia. Thank you for this question. This is a really good question, and we're going to make sure that we add it to our FAQ on the website. So we interpreted this question a couple ways, so I'll give a couple of answers, and hopefully that addresses the question by whom it was asked by. So firstly, once you receive your project pre-approval, what happens is the ESB program reserves funding for your project. So 6 months is the default amount of time that the funding will be reserved. We understand that the scope of your project may change over time, and there's always ways to make sure that you receive that funding. So if, for example, the client decides not to move forward with one measure, you're welcome to add new measures or change the quantity of existing measures in order to make up the difference that would have been lost. And I think we're going to go over the change process in a slide following this one. So participants can also apply for a change request if the scope is projected to exceed 110% of the initial incentive value. So interpreted another way, this question can be answered as follows. So if your clients are concerned, they do have to sign off on all major agreements. And one example of that is the participant agreement at the beginning. So they can have as much or as little visibility into their project application as they like. The funding for the program has been allocated to ERA already. So when client funding is reserved, they will receive it pending post-project approval at the end of their project. The clients will need to provide their own banking information, and the funds will be deposited into their account through e-transfer, so they will be receiving communications from us throughout the program as well. And then one thing to keep in mind is just that incentives are limited to $250,000 for a project and $500,000 per parent company. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about large capital projects.
Perfect. Thanks, Allison. So I have another question here for you, and it's, how can small businesses benefit from the ESB program?
Yeah, great question. So the Energy Savings for Business program was designed for small and medium-sized businesses to take advantage of the broad range of energy-saving technologies out there. So when we were deciding what to include in the program, we included measures that have really good payback periods and were effective at saving businesses money while considering costs and ease of installation. So we tried to find the middle ground there. Small businesses in particular could consider reevaluating their lighting, heating, and cooling needs. They will be able to find great energy savings in energy efficient furnaces, condensing boilers, advanced rooftop unit controls, other things like indoor lighting, occupancy controls, and some outdoor lighting. And I just wanted to highlight that we're about to release an article for small businesses detailing the lower cost and most effective measures that we do have in the program. So keep an eye out for that on the program website and in the next newsletter.
Thanks, Allison. So let's move on to the next question. This attendee has asked, we have been asked to apply on behalf of a customer that wants to rent our equipment. Do rentals apply? Mark, can you take on this question?
Sure, thanks, Portia. So obviously, looking at the terms and conditions, the Energy Savings for Business program was really designed and established around the more traditional ownership model. But with that being said, we don't specifically prohibit rentals from applying, but there'll be only certain circumstances where they're actually able to meet all of the terms and conditions. So for example, one of the terms and conditions states that the product has to be installed in the facility over the life of the measure. And so if it's a rental situation, we would have to know that the rental agreement is going to span the whole measure life. And then further, there's the eligible expenses are really geared towards the product cost being paid for. So it really depends on the way that the rental agreement is structured. And frankly, this can apply to, there's kind of other models of ownership out there right now, like energy performance contracting and whatnot. And so I would say that the best advice really is any situation where the project is sort of deviating from the standard model where the participant actually owns the products and is purchasing it, it's best to just get in touch with us as early as you can in the project. And basically at that point, we'll really try to understand the specifics of the, in this case, rental agreement, how it would fit within our terms and conditions, and what that would mean in terms of which expenses would be eligible and which would not. And then we'll do our best to work with you. So again, get in touch early. That way you find out if there's things that don't work or you know, things aren't as per expected. You want to find that out before you started and committed to the project.
Perfect, thanks, Mark. This next question is also for you. Are buildings that are taking part in the CIB Commercial Building Retrofits Initiative eligible for participation in the ESB program?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not sure how many folks are familiar with the federal program, the CIB. It's a pretty new financing initiative being run out by the federal government. To be honest, I'm not sure if anyone in Alberta would have a project yet, but if that's something that you're wondering about, as far as we're aware, we've been working with them as closely as possible. There should be no issue overlapping. The one is really more of a financing program. So in that sense, it actually would work really well with an incentive funding model. But obviously, as their program evolves, we have to make sure, you know, for example, one of the things about ESB is we do require that the ownership of the environmental attributes is transferred to ERA. And in our understanding is that currently that's not a requirement within the CIB. So again, it looks like it shouldn't be any issue. But to be honest, if you have a project that fits into this, we'd love to hear from you, and we can work directly with you to make sure that that's not a barrier.
Perfect, thanks, Mark. Just a reminder to everyone that we are taking questions during the presentation, and we'll be answering the ones sent in after we've wrapped up with the ones that were submitted prior to. So keep sending in those questions. We'd love to hear them, and we will get to them in a little bit. So the next question is, My project involves multiple measures and will be quite complex. Is it possible to receive additional support? Myron, I'm going to leave this one for you to answer.
Thanks, Portia. So as we mentioned earlier, contractors or participants who are looking to receive incentives for 3 or more measures should take advantage of our newly launched application support service. The program team will work directly with you to build out your application, streamline your application journey, and then answer any of your questions along the way. This also helps the review team out a lot too, because it leads to a higher quality application and speeds up the review process, minimizing any requirement for information requests or anything like that. So to get started with our application support service, get in touch with our team at support@esbprogram.ca. And then we also encourage anyone with a question or requiring assistance on their application to get in touch with our contact center by phone, email, or chat. We are here to help you with any concern you may have. We want to get these applications kind of submitted and reviewed as soon as possible.
Thanks, Myron. Okay, and then I have another follow-up question for you, Myron. This attendee is asking, in previous webinars, you mentioned that applications are often delayed due to information requests. How do I know that I've been sent an information request, and where can I find the details of it?
So Portia, that's a great question. Allison mentioned earlier in the webinar that we have made some improvements to the application portal. So when the review team sends an information request, that there's information missing from an application or something needs to be updated, both the participant and the contractor now get an email that notifies you that an information request is required. And then also when you log in through the application portal, you'll see that the status for your application will have changed to information request. And once you click on the application, you'll see what information is being requested, and you'll find instructions on how you can submit it back to our team for us to continue with our review.
Thanks, Myron. And then I have one more for you. Are solar project scheduled extensions being requested or granted?
So that's also a great question, Portia. It is something that we have run into. So in terms of how the program works right now, the current project completion deadline is 6 months from the receipt of a pre-approval. So when you log into the application portal and look at your application summary, there's a date there that says project completion deadline. That is the 6-month date from which you have, that tells you, hey, this is the date I have to have everything done by and submitted back to us. Solar projects can apply for extensions to this deadline via a change request. And then we evaluate each extension request individually with the ERA. And that's kind of the key process there. Essentially, you can submit it through a change request, and we'll review each one individually with ERA.
Thanks, Myron. So, Mark, I have a question here for you. This attendee has asked, how do I know if my facility is subject to the tier regulations?
Thanks, Portia. Yeah, I saw this question come in, and we were trying to think if it was a participant asking or a contractor. I think if you're a participant, the easy answer is probably someone within your organization would know. It's a pretty lengthy regulatory process that the company has to go through. So there should be someone within your firm that would know whether and which facilities apply under the tier. For contractors, so obviously that can be a bit trickier. So probably the first step would be if you think that there's a chance they might be contacting the actual owner of the facility. And for the most part, it's pretty obvious. Like the tier covers what they call large final emitters is the main group of folks in there. That's actually a published list as well, so you might be able to access the list from Alberta Environment and Parks. But generally, we're talking there, that's more like power plants, really large industrial facilities, larger oil and gas facilities. Now, recently they've added a path called opting into the program. That one's a bit trickier because all types of different companies can now apply. And so that one you'd have to check with the participant or contact Alberta Environment and Parks or even us, and we can look up. But again, it really only applies to certain sectors. So the agro industry, chemical, large fertilizer plants, mining and oil, and some forestry. So if we're talking like a standard commercial building or a small business, they almost certainly will not be part of the tier regulations. So you can be not too concerned about that. But if you are looking at one of these larger industrial facilities, that would be sort of the best thing to do. And maybe I'll remind folks too that it's actually only the facility that's regulated. So there's, you know, a number of these really large companies that might have a power plant, but their headquarters are not part of that regulated facility. They could do a lighting project or an HVAC project, and that would be no problem at all.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Okay, so our last question before we move on to the questions received during the presentation is, we believe our project is innovative and will produce great energy savings. However, it doesn't fit anywhere on the measures list. What can I do? Allison, can you take this question?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we mentioned previously, we're always looking for suggestions, and we do really want to hear about innovative projects, innovative technologies. That is, you know, a huge part of Emissions Reduction Alberta mandate, is to reduce emissions through innovative technologies. So we're always collecting information, and we are currently looking at a pathway to support more and more innovative projects. So if this sounds like a project you're working on, or you can think of a technology that you'd like to submit for our consideration, please get in touch with us.
All right. Thanks, Allison. Okay, so now we'll be moving on to questions received during the webinar. Our first question is, if the installation is supposed to be done in 6 months, where does the contractor find the start date for the 6-month countdown? Myron, can you take this question, please?
Yeah, and I see there's actually a follow-up question that's exactly related to it. So the first thing that happens is, if you log into the application portal, what you need to do is on your home page, go to the pre-approval tab. So what you'll see is in your applications overview section, when you log in, you'll see a pre-project tab, you'll see a pre-approval tab, and a post-project tab. So if you click on pre-approval and then click on the view application eyes, then what you'll see there is when you scroll down to the bottom, there's a section called project summary. What you'll see there is a project completion deadline. That is your 6-month deadline, essentially. So that's where you can find that date. The field name is called project completion deadline, and it's under project summary. And how you find that out is when you go to the pre-approval tab in your home page. If you have any specific questions about that, please email us, and we can show you exactly where to find that over a screen share. But that's where you'll find it.
And Myron, they would also be able to find it in the pre-application approval email that they get, right?
That's a good question. I can check the exact text of the email. It will be there when they click the link, but I'll have to check the specific date to see if it's in there.
Thanks, Myron. Just to follow up on that, can you also talk a little bit more about extensions and how long that is? Actually, I think I'll pass this question over to Mark. If an applicant is looking to complete their project with that, and the project takes a little bit longer than 6 months, how can they process this change request? And what are the terms for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Myron already talked about the process of submitting a change request, and then each request is reviewed by ourselves and Enerva collectively. Now, I'll start by saying, to be clear, we are really trying to work with folks, especially if it's just like a couple of days or a couple of weeks. We will always do our best to accommodate an extension request. That way you don't have to worry about your reservations vanishing sort of right as you're finishing the product. That's not the goal. But definitely do contact us before you've reached your deadline. That makes life a lot easier. And then from there, we basically evaluate the need for the extension request. The main thing is that we, as a program, we don't want to be holding money for folks that aren't proceeding. So we'll be doing probably some checking in with you on why you need the extension request and making sure that the project is in fact advancing. At times, folks ask for an extension request and it's because there's some sort of corporate issue and maybe the project's not actually going forward. That's why we put the deadline. So in those cases, we would like to make that funding back available to new projects if there's a project not proceeding. And then we're limited by how late we can go. just because this is a short-term program. And so obviously we can't issue extensions that go beyond the life of the program or something of that sort. So now on our website, it's kind of buried, I think, in the FAQs. So for solar, like larger solar PV, CHP, geothermal, a handful of measures, you can request up to a 12-month project life. And then for regular projects, it's the 6 months by default. But again, as you know, if there's like an extra few weeks or an extra month or something, the best is to just submit a change request and we'll work with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. So we have a question. Oh, did you have something to add?
Portia, I do have one note for Allison's follow-up question about whether the project completion deadline is in the email. So I pulled up the email templates, and yes, in the email confirmation to the customer or the participant, confirming that they've executed their participant acceptance, the project completion deadline date is listed in that email as well. So it will be in that email that the participant received what the deadline was.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks, Myron. So let's move on to our next question. The question is, my project had some changes. How can I go in and update a measure in my application? Myron, can you take this question on? I think there are a few other considerations when it comes to this answer. So can you just dive through those?
Yeah, that's a great question, Portia. So there's a few things here. So if your project has not yet been submitted for pre-approval or not yet received a pre-approval, then it's really simple to make those changes. You can update the measures just within your application itself. Just ask us to unlock the application if the application is not unlocked, and we'll allow you to do that. And then if you're just changing details within a measure itself, then you just have to go within the measure and change the value or whatever it happens to be that you want to change. But if you're adding a new measure, like say you're changing from one specific type of measure to another measure, what you actually have to do is you have to add a new measure and remove the old measure. So that's really simple to do when you go into the application process under step 4 where you enter measure details. You can just click add a new measure and then you can remove any old measures that you don't need anymore. So that ability is there. Now, if you've already submitted your application, then it gets a bit more complicated, because then what that means then is your application's been submitted and we've reserved an incentive for it. So now if you're changing those values, if it's more than a 10% change in the incentive, we do recommend that you submit a change request. And in the change request, please tell us exactly what you plan to change. Then we can take a quick look at that and say, okay, yeah, that's fine. Or no, there might be an issue with that. If we do approve that change request, then what happens is, again, we unlock the application for you. And it's super simple. Again, you just have to either add the new measure and remove the old measure, or update the measure as required. So pretty simple to do. If you do have any questions about that, please send the contact center a note and we're happy to set up a screen share and show you how to do it.
Perfect. Thanks, Myron. Okay. So our next question is, we had a surprise issue with hardware during our LED upgrade and are looking into other options that fit within the program. When does the program end? Mark, can you answer this question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Myron's previous answer on the change request was actually really helpful too. So hopefully you can find a solution that fits and make a change request. As for the question about how long the program will be open and accepting new applications, it's really dependent on two things. So we currently have it planned to have been open for a full year of accepting applications. So there's still quite a bit of time left there. That'd be, up until as late as January or somewhere around that time, possibly even a bit later. But obviously the big question there is that that's subject to funding availability. So if the program uptake continues, obviously the program will close once the budget's fully subscribed. And as Allison's slide showed, there's actually a little bar graph on our website where you can see the current amount that's been allocated or reserved. So hopefully that's helpful from a planning perspective. Obviously we can't fully predict the future, but there should be still quite a bit of time to get your solution in.
Allison, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, there's been a lot of questions about change requests so far. We do have quite a few resources available on change requests, so you don't have to listen to us talk about it anymore if your preferred method of learning is reading. We do have, if you go onto our website and onto the Energy Savings for Business page, there's a little subpage on there called Program Resources. And there's a webinar that we just did a couple weeks ago about the change request. So we can actually walk you through how to do a change request in the portal. And there's also change request instructions. So there's a booklet that has some screenshots of the portal that can also walk you through that way. So you're welcome to go and check those resources out. It might be really helpful if you need to make some changes in your project. And, if anything, just contact us. We're happy to walk you through and happy to help you with any of the questions that you have sort of live and real time with your application.
Thanks, Allison. And speaking of change requests, this brings us to our next question. How long does it take to receive approval for a change request? Myron, can you take this question?
Yeah, for sure, Portia. So it really depends on the nature of the change request. Some things are super simple to do, such as changing the contractor. Other things do take a bit longer, and some things might require specific ERA approval. So super simple change requests will only take a couple days, but the longer change requests may take 1 to 2 weeks, just depending on whether they need a specific approval or not.
Great, thanks, Myron. So our next question is, if a facility has a lease to own agreement for the equipment, will it be counted as an eligible measure? Mark, can you address this question?
Yeah, absolutely. And Myron, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. So I was talking about the rental agreements. Rental agreements obviously are a bit more complicated because their terms are quite different. The lease to own model, it should be no problem at all. It should be pretty straightforward. The only thing we'll likely need that's a bit unique there would be, we do need an invoice with the actual cost. Even if the participant will be paying leased payments, we need to know the actual capital cost of the equipment. But in that case, that's a great example where with the lease to own, we're confident it'll be there for the life of the measure, and that at the end of the day, the participant actually owns it. So that's pretty straightforward.
Great, thanks, Mark. Our next question is pretty straightforward. How do I know what my DLC ID is? Myron, can you take on this question?
So this is actually a really great question, Portia. What we've seen in, frankly, programs across North America is typically what we see is manufacturers and distributors typically know the DLC ID. Contractors may not be as familiar with it. So there's a couple things you can do. The first thing you can do is on the spec sheet itself, you should check if the product is DLC, if it has the DLC certification or not. And in some cases, the product ID may be there. If it is not there on the actual spec sheet itself, what you need to do is you need to go to the DLC website. So if you type in DLC certified and then maybe type in the keyword solid state certified lighting, it will come up to the actual list. And what you can do is you can search by your manufacturer and model number. And what it will do is if the product has DLC ID, it will actually show you exactly what the DLC ID is. And then that will also tell you what category it's certified under. So that's what we use on the review side. So definitely, I would recommend that if you don't have the DLC ID, that's a great place to find it. If you are having any issues, please contact the contact center at support@espprogram.ca, and we're happy to help you.
Perfect. Thanks, Myron. I have a question here about timelines. I think we've already addressed this earlier on in the presentation, and I think it might be worth repeating. How long will it take my application to be reviewed? And Myron, can you answer this one as well?
Yeah, so for the past couple of months, it's essentially taken 3 to 5 business days to review applications. What we have found is if you submitted good applications, it does mean less time in the review just because it's easier to find all of the information. There have been a couple of applications that are more complex and do take longer, but on average, we're seeing 3 to 5 business days to review an application.
Can you also speak to the timeline it takes for an information request to be reviewed and approved as well?
Yeah, so again, it will all depend on the nature of the information request, but typically we see those done within 3 to 5 business days as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Myron.
Maybe just to clarify, that's with an information request, that's after it's been resubmitted. So obviously, like some of them take longer if the applicant is, going back and having to fill out some information and we're waiting for them. But we do try to turn around very quickly once we get the resubmitted information.
Thanks, Mark. So our next question is, I need to change my customer's name. How do I do that? Myron, can you take on this question? And just review again, change requests.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of changing your customer's name, what we've actually seen there is once people actually read the participant terms and conditions, they realize actually maybe it shouldn't have been a specific customer's name that was entered. Maybe it should have been another business name instead. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. When your participant logs in, so it's going to be something that only your customer or participant can do. You can't do it, unfortunately, as a contractor. But when they log in, there'll be an option there for them to hit edit details. And if they edit details, then they can change the name. Now that works if it's the same contact and person with the same contact email that can also bind the company. However, if it is a brand new company, that creates an additional complication. And for that, I do recommend that you email us at support@esbprogram.ca, and we figure out exactly what the best way forward is, because there's a legal implication to that as well. Because if you have a pre-project agreement kind of already gone through, then technically the old customer's name is the one who's agreed to the terms and conditions. So at that point, it's much more difficult to change the customer's name.
Great, thanks, Myron. So our next question has to do with the incentives payments process. I see on the website that there's a webinar dedicated to the payments process next week. When can we expect an update on this? Myron, can you answer this question?
Hi, yeah, Portia. Do you mind just repeating that? I just want to make sure I got the exact nuance there.
They're just asking for an update on the payments process.
Oh yeah, for sure. So we've started the payments process with ERA. It is the first batch of payments that are going out. So they are taking a bit longer just because we want to make sure the process is running smoothly and all the financial controls are in place. What you should start seeing if you're a customer or whoever's being assigned the payee is you should start seeing those incentive the application statuses change sometime in the second week of July to the next status. And then what triggers there is you're going to get an email there that kicks off your payment process. We are planning to have a webinar on that, I believe, next week to kind of walk you guys through how that incentive payment process is going to work. So there will be a full set of instructions for you there for you to follow.
Perfect. Thanks, Myron. The next question is, for a project, not all the equipment will be eligible for the incentive. So our invoice amount will not match the eligible amount. Do we need to show a separate cost for ineligible measures in the quote? Mark, can you answer this question, please?
It'd actually be best for Myron, but yeah, like it's, especially at the pre-approval stage, we do need to know the cost for the supported measures. And so I think Myron's team has, worked with folks on different solutions there, whether that's to provide just the itemized, like reissue an invoice with just the itemized amounts. I think some folks have submitted spreadsheets in the past to help break it down. So maybe it's best to just contact support. But I guess, yeah, the easy answer is we do need to know the costs that were allocated specifically to the eligible measures.
Yeah, and Mark, I'm happy to provide some additional insight here. So completely understood where you may be doing a project where you have lots of different equipment and only some of the equipment is applying for an incentive within the program. So we're not trying to get you to really change your invoicing process too much, but we do need to have a justification for the project costs. So just as a good example, say we have a $10,000 project and only $5,000 of the costs are considered eligible equipment and materials costs or labor or design or whatever happens to be. If you just upload like a separate document that clearly just itemizes what is included and what isn't, then that's fine. We don't need you to change your invoice, but we just do need some documentation there that kind of supports what the project cost you've entered in is, just so we know what is eligible and what's not eligible, if that's helpful. And again, as Mark mentioned, if you do have any questions, again, please contact support@esbprogram.ca, and we're happy to answer that question to provide more detail for you.
Perfect. Thanks, Myron. So I think that might be our last question for the day. So before we end the webinar, I'm just going to hand the reins over to Myron, who'll just go over some application tips.
So thanks, Portia. We understand that time is really valuable for all Alberta businesses, and our goal as a support team is to get you through the process as seamlessly as possible. So one of the first things we really want to do is make sure that we recommend that you review the resources page. We've created a number of resources to help guide you through the application process. There you can find things like the participant terms and conditions. We really recommend that you read them because that is the contract that your participants are being held to. The application guidebook, any of the measure-specific application checklists, recordings of past webinars that might explain specific technology or processes, and there's also so much more resources available there. You can find lots of questions about the application process within those documents. And again, as I think we've repeatedly mentioned during this webinar, if you do have any questions, please contact us at support@esbprogram.ca, and we're happy to point you in the right direction. We do want to make sure that the process is as simple for you as possible to make sure those applications are being turned around quickly, are submitted, are good applications that are submitted, as well as being turned around quickly. Our next tip really is to group measures by completion date. If you are looking to install multiple measures, then we do recommend that you submit multiple applications to ensure one measure doesn't keep you from receiving an incentive quickly. So a good example of this is, for example, if you're an electrical contractor and you're doing both a lighting and an LED project as well as a VFD project in the facility. If you want to minimize the risk of anything getting held up, we would recommend that you submit the LED project and the VFD project separately, just to make sure that possibly one approval is really quick and the other one takes longer, or it takes longer for one project to complete. So we would recommend that you do split applications where it makes sense to do that. And then our last tip, as a lot of you on the webinar might be aware, if you have seen information requests, a lot of the information requests are on the cost quotes. They're the most common reason for an IR. So we really want to make sure we avoid delay in review by ensuring that your cost quote is in order. The totals in the cost quote should match the cost submitted in your application. That's really one of the first things we check. So whatever you tell us the costs are in the application, if they're different in the cost quote, then that automatically triggers an IR because we do need to make sure those are aligned. And then we also do check the equipment and materials design and labor sub costs. If those are split out, then it makes it so much easier and faster for the review team to get the to process the application. And with that, I'll hand it back to Portia to wrap up the presentation.
Thanks, Myron. So as a reminder, we'll be posting the recording of this webinar on the Energy Savings for Business Program Resources webpage listed above. You can also find links to the portal and the FAQs on the website. If you can't find what you're looking for, our contact center team is always happy to help. You can reach them by email, phone, or chat. Please see the contact details listed here or on the website.